Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Shadow and Sun Show, and welcome back to something a little bit different than our usual bill of fare. As you can see, little guy is not at the helm of the camera today. It's just me and you guys all out there in TV land. I want to go over something that I've wanted to do for a while. As you can see from the title of the video, why AD&D after all these years. I want to talk about why I'm still playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons after going on 40 years. Obviously, the nostalgic draw to the game that brought me in plays a huge factor in why I'm such a fan of AD&D and why it's still my favorite of all the role-playing games, even though lately I've been in a bit of a sci-fi mood. Sci-fi was actually my real introduction into fiction and fantasy. Things like Doc Savage and The Shadow, obviously, the pulps from my era, comic books and things like that. I didn't really even know about fantasy until I started playing Dungeons and Dragons. That drew me into the world of fantasy and all the different books. And despite what you might think, it was not the Lord of the Rings that was my first fantasy novel. It was actually Board of the Rings. Go figure. And you can go back and check out that video way back in the Wayback Machine. I did a review of it and why it drew me in. I've always been a bit of a smart ass, and humor has always been a big part of my life. I spent years, if not decades, studying every video I could on Comedy Central, and it's always come into my role-playing game life as well as my regular life. But like I said, go check out the video if you get a chance. Like I said, the nostalgic draw of AD&D always brings me back to my books and my miniature collection and my painting habit and the hobby in general. I have so many fond memories and so many friends that I'll never see again because of circumstances, and someday, with any luck, I'll meet them again. But it's always going to bring me back to my childhood, growing up, all the fun that my friends and I had playing this wonderful game in this absolutely wonderful hobby that we're all blessed to be able to be part of. We're so spoiled in modern society, being able to spend time doing something like this, and I'll always be grateful, and I'll always be grateful to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. That's the basis, and I'm not going to lie about it and say there were other factors. It's always going to be that. That's the memories are things that I can't get back, but I can try to expand upon and enlarge my overall memories in the old think and meet. The second reason why I'm still such a huge fan of this game is obviously I know it like the back of my hand. I played nothing but AD&D for more than 10 years. I did play some of the other games in the beginning as well. Traveler, Star Frontiers, Boot Hill, Top Secret, Gamma World. Mostly the TSR games of the time, until I discovered that there were a lot more games out there, better games in some respect than everything, except of course AD&D. It's, even after all these years, it's still, in my opinion, the best version of the game. Now, a lot of people are going to argue with that, saying, this version or that version or the next version. And, for them, for that individual, whoever that person or people may be, for you guys, yeah, that's probably true. For me, though, it's not. I know it like the back of my hand. I know all the books. I have all the books, with a few exceptions, and I'm continually looking for them. And, at some point I will get them all, or as many of them as I can. And duplicates, I do have, a couple extra players' handbooks and Dungeon Master's guides and monster manuals for other people at the table to be able to use. My original copies, are pretty beat up if you've seen them in the past. I should have brought them out, but I got other books to show you. Another one of the reasons, and these reasons aren't really in any particular order of value or importance, but AD&D is a huge part of the history of adventure gaming, role-playing games, miniature games, however you want to classify them. That's up to you. You know, it's your life and your brain. You know, organize that as you want. But from its inception, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was expanding upon the original white box set more than tenfold. The original white box set could be, you know, stuffed into one, maybe 200-page book, including the illustrations from back then, which, you know, are, you know, they're all part of the history and the memories of so many people. But it expanded the game with so many, not just books, but players and accessibility. Unfortunately, there were, you know, the bad parts of the history that came along with Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. You know, the Satanic Panic, which was a big part of my growing up. I experienced, you know, the truth of some of the statements that the mainstream media was you know, shoveling out at the time. And while for the most part a lot of it was just fear porn, there were places and people and groups that participated in the worst that the game had to offer. I'm not blaming it on the game, but it did attract people that were, you know, clearly unhinged and needing help, and the only help they found was through this game. And, you know, thankfully it didn't get worse. It got better for the gaming community with the release of second edition AD&D. It toned everything down and took out things, changed things, and in my opinion, it was the beginning of the end of what made AD&D great. Now, there's some fantastic things about second edition, and I'm going to go into those in a moment, but I'll do so more in a second video, maybe even next Friday, so I can collect my thoughts. Because for me, they're the same game. AD&D first edition, second edition, you take them, you squish them together, you mix it up and take what you like and toss out the rest. Maybe you'll come back to those other aspects, maybe you won't. Maybe, you know, as the afterword in the original Dungeon Master's Guide stated, it's all up to you. Play what you want, use what you want, ignore the rest. It's your table. As long as you guys are having fun, you know, I don't see a problem with that. And, you know, as soon as you guys make up a house rule or decide on a ruling or whatever, the game is now yours. It's your version, so to speak, and that's all up to the people at the table. If everybody's cool with the changes or omissions or additions, you know, whether it be from another book or Dragon magazine or you know, an internet article, whatever you guys choose at your table, it's now your game, uniquely your own. And if you take it elsewhere, cool. If you don't, and it's just your group of friends and that's all you guys ever do is, you know, make little changes here, little changes there, it's your game, and I'm not here to tell you you're playing it wrong or that you're doing it wrong. It's up to you. You know, some people play with free parking when they play Monopoly, some people don't, and some people like pineapple on their pizza. I'm not going to say, you know, what you guys should do with your life. I'm just telling you, this is what I do, so maybe you guys can get to know me just a little bit better. You know, that's the reason I'm here, is to share my experiences, and hopefully you guys will learn a little something along the way. Maybe, you know, you'll throw me some hate in the comment section. You know, I'm okay. I can handle it. I'm a big boy. I've seen worse than some snotty comments in the chat section. It's not going to get me down with the experiences I've had in the real world. It can't even compare. Now, I kind of touched on this. The amount of content that was originally available for AD&D is probably still more than there's ever been released for probably any other game since then. And you know, it's going to take a good long time, and with the way certain companies envision, reimagine, rewrite their game to make a 3rd, 4th, 12th edition, AD&D is never going to change. It's done, but its content is so vast that it's going to take one company some serious dedication. The only company that comes to mind would be Palladium, and I played that a lot, and I'll probably go into that. But my friend Max he's got dibs on that till the end of the year, and I told him, you know, I can wait to throw my 2 cents in there. Don't want to take away from any of his videos or his opinions on it, because we're pretty much, you know, in line with one another when it comes to, you know, how awesome Palladium is. But this is AD&D, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And for example, here's one of my favorite books, and it's one of four. It looks like an ancient tome. It's got this, cheesy fake leatherette cover, and there, I believe, are hard copies of this, which I would love to trade out. But for the meantime, I've got all four of the Encyclopedia Magica. This is literally thousands, if not like near 10,000 different magic items that were, I believe this is technically a second edition book, but like I said, mix and match, it's all the same to me. Well, almost all the same. But it's chock full of every magic item they could find from every source, including Dragon Magazine, and this is just volume 1 at, what is it, close to 400 pages per book. Okay, that's a lot of magic items. You are never going to be at a loss for a magic item. Now, me personally, I don't use them as much as I used to because I like to make my own personalized magic items for the most part for every campaign I run. I like to give people something new and something, a little bit more, like I said, personalized for that party or that character. Now, there's also a 4-volume set of the Wizard's Spell Compendium. Now, this is just Magic User spells. Volume 1, and there's only 3 or 4 volumes of this. Yes, there are, in fact, 4 volumes of this as well. That's pretty hefty. All the spells they could find from all the different sources. Again, almost 287 pages of nothing but Magic User spells. There was also the Priest Spell Compendium, and I'm missing 1 volume of this, and I'll pick it up. It's not a big deal. Most of the priests in my game, stick with, the healing spells, as many as they can grab, and then go from there for the most part. Now, and I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. They know in my campaign, if you don't use as many healing spells as possible, you're gonna die. I'm not throwing out healing potions like they're, Red Bulls. It's just not gonna happen. I think potions are overused and would be so easy to be destroyed, damaged, lost, stolen, evaporated. They're not going to just sit in a dungeon for decades. Oh, I found it, it's in perfect shape. I don't care how good the cork is. They're just not going to be as plentiful as some people would like. Now, I do run a very high magic, as they call it, campaign, but potions, believe it or not, most of my players actually go with a different method, which is kind of like instant coffee. It's a powder. You add it to water and shake it up, and then you got your potion that'll be good, until it evaporates, which to me makes a little bit more sense. It's a little easier to carry, not a whole bunch of glass test tubes or vials or what have you that could shatter from, being hit with a sword, falling down some stairs, things like that. You need it, you mix it up, you're good to go. But that's, it's just a little tip from me on how I run my magic items. Spells, that's a whole nother thing, and I could probably go on for an hour on how I do magic spells. But I want to get on to the next thing, which is character creation. It's incredibly simple to make a character, and you still have so much to work with if you're a good role player, if you're a good gamer, and you know what it's like to be in the situation. Obviously I hang out with a lot of ex-military guys, a lot of survivalists who have a great deal of earthly knowledge that I allow them to use, provided their profession, like ranger, fighters, things like that. I'm going to let them use a lot of their innate knowledge for their character, and I don't consider it metagaming. I just think of it as they're more suited to run these kinds of characters. A lot of my players don't really like to run magic users because it's so alien to them, and rightly so. It takes a special kind of person to run a magic user and run them well. And so for my games, they're usually very heavily reliant on fighters, and a little bit more so with clerics, and of course, rogues of all types, because all of my friends are a bunch of scoundrels, in real life and at heart, and of course at the gaming table. Now, when I say that the character creation is simple, it really is. The proficiency system that is in the Wilderness Survival Guide and the Dungeoneer Survival Guide is really kind of simple once you get the, you understand the basic concept, and it's all you need, and it doesn't bog you down with dozens of skills unless you play for decades and you multi-class and blah blah blah. But for the basic character, you're looking at a couple, maybe 3 extra abilities that help personalize your character. The hardest thing about making an advanced Dungeons and Dragons character is literally buying your equipment. That takes more time than anything else. All the other aspects are really simple, but yet there's room for more crunch as you go on, especially new players to AD&D or any role-playing game. There's a bit of a learning curve, but once you hit a certain level, you've got it all, and you can only expand your knowledge and your playing ability as you go on. And for that reason, I still like it. There are a lot of games out there that are incredibly skill heavy or completely skill based, which is fine. I have a great respect for those games because they are actually usually more realistic and rarely rely on things like magic, although some do, like Palladium. But I really enjoy those games as well. But it's usually a different setting. It's rarely pure fantasy or medieval, style fantasy games. And it's entirely up to you. A lot of people don't even use the proficiency system, and for me, I get it. That just makes the players more reliant on thinking outside the box and not needing their character sheet except to write down the hit points, losses, and additional treasures they find from time to time. Most of my players don't even come to the table with the character sheets. We usually just take notes. I have a lot of that stuff written down in my notes as to what the players have or don't have. And obviously with my older players, they have to bring gigantic notebooks of their character history, because God only knows what what they're going to pull out of their hat when the game time is here and we start rolling those dice. Now, another aspect, and I touched on it a minute ago with the treasure and the magic items. That's another huge aspect in my love for this game. There is so much out there, but yet there's still so much that can be created from scratch, whether it be magic items or spells, or even good old-fashioned regular devices or equipment. I've seen in my game career, I've seen players come up with almost a dozen different grappling hooks for different situations, and different playing groups come up with different things. So there's all kinds of room for expansion and growth when it comes to the tools of the trade, whether they be magic items or spells. Then there's the monsters. The AD&D system is full of there are 3 monster books: the Monster Manual 1, Monster Manual 2, and the Fiend Folio. But there are, I can't even count how many monsters there are in the old sources like Dragon Magazine, Dungeon Magazine, and of course online. But the ability to make up a new monster on the fly is pretty simple. You don't really need to go into a lot of details about the monster. A vague description, maybe draw a picture if you're good at it, write down a dozen or so stats, and that's it. It's pretty simple, and there's always room for improvement, metamorphosis of new ideas of new monsters. There's always going to be room for more, and you can always take from the new stuff, or you can take from older stuff. You can take from books, TV, movies, etc. One of the last things I want to talk about is the fact that Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, despite all the obstacles it's overcome over the last decade or so, maybe 20 years, depending on how you look at it, is still being played today. There are still a large number of people playing it. I'm in a game right now, an AD&D game, where I'm not the Dungeon Master. First time in a very long time. And I'm having a lot of fun with these guys, and I've never met them face to face. I'm playing online. I don't even know what any of them look like, but we're still enjoying the game. We're still role-playing, for the most part, to my satisfaction, with a lot of things. Yes, there's some talk of game mechanics during gameplay, which I'd like to see less of, but it's kind of inevitable in a game like this when you are playing online. In person, there's more time to get these details hashed out before the game, and then just go into the full-on role-playing immersion style of gaming. And there's some really good RPGers in this game. I don't want to mention any names, make some people feel bad that they're not playing well enough. There's always going to be those issues with people who are still a little uncomfortable, still learning the game, let's say, because this game is ever evolving. Even though it's done, it's still evolving in individual circles of players. And one of the last things I want to talk about is this game is so popular that it's now being copied. And they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And while most of the people who would be flattered are no longer with us, a few of them are still out there, and this game is still being emulated with the OSR. I'm not exactly 100% on the details of which games are and aren't, technically a new version of AD&D, or whether they're BECMI or basic or what have you. But no one's really going after some of the later editions and copying them. I think that's been played out, and the people that did it, they're having their success. Good for them. They've got players. They're making people happy. Cool. I'm happy for those people and those players and those companies to a small extent. If you're a fan of this and you didn't want it to end, and so you've done something to keep it alive and maybe rewrite it, etc. Cool. I'm not going to play that. I've got so many copies of my D&D books. I don't really need a new version of the same old game. For me, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. The wheel was fine when I found it, and that wheel was AD&D. First, second, mix them up, match it up, whatever you want. For me, it's still all the same game. It's later on down the road where, to me, it changed and became something different, and just something I don't know that much about, technically, having not bought the books and read them. Someday maybe someone will hand me a free player's handbook, a free Dungeon Master's Guide, and say, hey, put up or shut up. Read the books. Then you'll know exactly what the differences are. But from having played a few games and listened, for the past couple of years as to the differences, I have yet to hear anything that's going to draw me in other than the people at the table. I'm in a Pathfinder game with Bruce Lombardo and Connell the Cigar DM and a few other people who I don't think actually have YouTube channels. And I'm there for them, not the game. If we were playing Monopoly or Texas Hold'em or something like that online, I'd be there for that reason, not the game. Now, mind you, Bruce tells a good story. He's made the adventure very exciting. But it's not perfect. Nobody is. And there's, I'm not going to lie, I would rather we were playing AD&D, but that's not the game for them. Maybe someday they'll go back to it. Maybe they'll rediscover it and realize that, hey, you know what? It's easier, it's simpler. For old guys like me, I don't want to spend, hours and hours making up a character. I just want to, write down a few things and get into combat, get into adventuring, get into exploring, which for me is my favorite part, is the exploring, and role-playing, get into the game. But AD&D is still technically, in my opinion, being emulated throughout the gaming community, throughout the gaming world. They can call it whatever they want, but AD&D is where Dungeons and Dragons was at its highest in the game itself. It couldn't get any better, in my opinion, and everything I've heard from then on out is only detracted from my desire to learn more about the later editions. And not the last reason, but I may have talked about this a minute ago, but it's still, for me, it's so easy to play AD&D. There's a lot of people that are going to say, oh, but THACO, you know what, if you can't handle a little bit of, basically all you need to do is write down 20 numbers for what you need to roll to hit that armor class. If that's too much for you, then don't come talking to me about needing to write down all these feats, traits, and skills, because these are just tiny little numbers, 2-digit numbers, sometimes only a 1-digit number. If that's too much, then I don't know what to say. It's really not that difficult. The saving throws, maybe you want to write those down, cool. There's like 5 different numbers. Again, you might have to write what you're saving versus, and then that number, and you can erase it as you go up levels, etc. But it's still a very easy to learn game, very easy to play, and it still has a lot of room for crunch. Crunch being more complex rules, for those of you unfamiliar with the term. You can make the game more and more complicated as you go on, as the players are ready for it, as the dungeon master is ready for it. If he wants to, include a critical hit or fumble rule, which I'm completely opposed to in Dungeons and Dragons, because then a lot of things change in my opinion, but I'm going to go into that later. But there are other rules that people have added to their game. Cool. And just for the record, Arduin created the critical hits. Arduin created the fumble. Prove me wrong. They did it, and I wasn't a big fan of it in Arduin. I'm less of a fan of it in AD&D. But if you want to add it, and your players are okay with a 5% chance of every time they draw their sword of cutting their own head off, or having the monsters having the same ability to cut their head off with a lucky die roll, cool. That's up to you. I realize some critical hit rules are more complicated than that, but the original was pretty simple. You roll a 20 or a 1, you roll on a chart, and that's it, period. Good luck. Sucks to be you. Now, the final reason AD&D is still my favorite is probably not valid for anybody out there but the staunchest of collectors like myself. I've been collecting things, including game books and materials and dice, and well, not really dice. I got like 20 dice in my collection. Seriously, that's like all I use. But games and novels and books and miniatures are just one of the things I collect. You guys have seen my other videos. Not going to talk about that here, but you guys know that I'm a collector of many things, including information. And AD&D is the height of its collectability. Now, you can argue that the white books are worth so much money. A good crispy edition of first printing white box can run about $1,000, but you might as well buy just a chunk of gold. You'd be better off, because it's going to last longer, go up in value more, and be more readily exchanged on some sort of market. But AD&D was the height of its profit and value. Right now, I'm going to use this example because I did the research recently. A copy of the 5th edition Player's Handbook, I can buy one right now brand new for $20. When it came out, it was $54 brand new, and I could buy a brand new one off Amazon for about $20, shipping plus or minus whether or not you have Prime. You can get free shipping and that sort of thing. Whereas a decent copy, a decent condition copy of the Player's Handbook for AD&D first edition is about $60. Now, I can go on eBay and bid as low as $5 and potentially win a brand new 5th edition Player's Handbook. Okay? And it's only going to go down in value. You guys know this. If you don't, I'm going to explain. Whereas a Player's Handbook might start the bidding at $20, but that's because the guy doesn't want to lose his shirt should only one bidder come in there. And for those out there trying to sell your Player's Handbook, you know where to find me, because I'm looking for more. If I had 10 copies of the original Player's Handbook, I'd still be looking for an 11th, because it is a good investment for me in the way I think and the way I collect. And I'm also inclined to hand them out to special people in my friend circle when they need one. The 5th edition, 4th edition, maybe not the 3rd edition. I didn't get to look into that, but the 4th and 5th edition of the current Dungeons and Dragons, owned by Wizards of the Coast, I believe, is only going to go down in value with the release of the next edition, 6th edition, which will probably be a lot sooner than they're willing to admit. They will put it out. They will put out a 7th edition. They will put out a 12th edition. They're probably, like I said the other night, probably working on their version of 20th edition of AD&D, seeing as how most companies live and breathe through planned obsolescence. They know that they will need a steady influx of cold hard cash to keep their company afloat, and Magic the Gathering, while it's a big part of it, is only a part of it. Maybe it's 95%, but they still want the money that they can gain from 7th, 12th edition, whatever it is. They know that out there will be a market for it, and if they force it upon the customers like they do with Magic the Gathering, saying your product is no longer valid, you can't use them in tournaments, we're going to make the next edition of D&D, and we're going to stop making content for all the previous editions. You must buy the newest, shiniest book if you want to keep playing what the cool kids are playing. And personally, I'm not buying into that. I'll play with the nerds and the geeks from the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and I'll be more than content with my favorite RPG of all time, that being Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And you guys are going to play whatever you want, and maybe you'll invite me to a game, maybe you won't. I have actually been invited to a few games, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to play new games. But make no mistake, AD&D is, was my first love when it came to gaming, role-playing games, and it always will be. You never forget your first love. I wrote a quite a healthy article on that a while back, and if you're interested, I'll see if I can find it for you. But you never forget it, and I'm loyal to my original love, that being Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I'll continue playing it. I'm going to play other games. I don't consider it cheating on her. I will, and she doesn't mind because, well, she's not alive in that sense, and I have her permission to go out and play some Traveler, Star Frontiers, Adventure Conquer King, and God only knows what's going to come down the pike that's going to grab my interest. I'm a huge fan of Western fantasy games, fictional games, even to some extent Western historical games, and you never know. I'm going to keep playing games, and I hope you guys do too. I hope you guys continue to play the games you love with the people you love. That's it. That's what I've said since the beginning, and it'll probably be my final words and probably etched on my tombstone, somewhere, later on down the road, I hope. But for you guys out there, I really mean it. Go out there, play whatever you want, be happy with the game that you and your friends want to play, and don't take any crap from any big company or any YouTuber or the people at your local game store laughing at you because you're playing Metamorphosis Alpha. Enjoy the hell out of that game, and you know what? Give them the double-barreled middle finger on the way out, because who the hell are they? They're not your friends. Your friends are the ones that matter. Of course, obviously your family, and hopefully you guys get a chance to play with your family, because that's kind of a treat that's pretty rare in this community. I know some people who've done it. I had the opportunity to play with my mom before she passed away, and she enjoyed the hell out of it. But unfortunately, stuff happens. So, for me, from the heart, enjoy the game you're playing. If you have anything to say or you want to, chat with me, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, the comment section. Some of you out there have my email address. I'll try to remember to put it in the description if you guys want to get a hold of me privately. That's a great way to do it. Until next time, if you enjoy this little conversation, I'll do a part 2 and talk about the differences between first and second edition Dungeons and Dragons, because I'm noticing some things now that I didn't notice back then, and I want to thank Max for pointing those out, because there is a significant difference between the two editions, but not so much that you can't integrate the two. So again, thank you guys for hanging out with me for this last half hour. I really appreciate the chance to get to talk to you guys like this, and have a great weekend. I'll see you guys real soon. Bye.